Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Pauline Chung, and I wanted to welcome our speakers today for Grief, the Elephant in the Room, 3 Ways to Support Grief in the Workplace. Speakers are Ilana Shapiro Yahdav and Kim Hanlon. They are certified grief recovery specialists and will be able to provide us a lot of information today. And then we have Q&A time built in, but please stay on mute. You can type your questions into the chat box and take it away, Ilana.
Thank you so much for having us here today, Pauline, and for everyone else being here. We're so happy to be here with you today and to give you some tools that introduces you to some of the work that we do in helping navigate grief as it shows up in the workplace. And as Pauline says, I'm Ilana Shapiro Yahdav, and my partner here, Kim Hanlon. And we just, we know this topic can sometimes be a little bit sensitive and may bring up some uncomfortable feelings. So just please, if that happens, please let that be okay. And whatever comes up, just let that be okay.
Yeah, we're so happy to be here with you. Thanks for having us here. And, we just really want to help normalize this conversation. Grief really is that elephant in the room. And I think now, given the pandemic, people are a little more aware of the losses that we're experiencing just day to day.
Before we dive in, we just want to share why we do what we do. We both experienced profound loss, and we know how we felt and how hard it was to navigate loss for us, especially in the workplace. And this is one of the many reasons that fuels us and makes us so passionate. So on the left side is me, pre-digital, a very long time ago, with my dad, who's my why. And he died the day after I turned 24, over a decade and a half ago, of terminal brain cancer. And I spent many years just lost in my grief maze, not knowing what to do and looking for some sort of tools to help me work through my broken heart. And I promised myself that when I found those tools, I would devote myself to giving back to others. And so it was a long road, but I'm proud I finally got there.
And likewise, I'm inspired by, how I lost my brother. And on the right-hand side is a picture of me with my brother, 4th of July fireworks, many years ago. And he died in 2012 of drug overdose. And I watched him struggle and wish that he had the tools. When he died, I was inspired to help others to just navigate loss and just build emotional resilience. And then also, just since I felt so lost and like I was barely hanging on in my grief, just as Ilana said, when I got the tools to help feel like I was getting myself back and not just in the fog of grief, I knew I really wanted to help others too. It's not a fun place to be. So we've shared our why, and we also want to share why we feel this is important for everybody and for companies to know more about grief and how to navigate it as it comes up in the workplace. We will share some about how COVID-19 is bringing up different layers and types of grief for us, and then dive into just in general the types of grief and how it can manifest in our personal lives and in the workplace. And of course, we want to provide tools and review just types of support that you can seek out to help you navigate this. And we'll have times for Q&A, but as I noted in the chat, feel free to drop any questions or comments there as well along the way.
So now we just want to talk a little bit about why this is important. We shared why this is important to us, and now we want to share why this is also important from a company perspective. And when we have the tools to work through difficult, intense feelings, we can be more productive, we can be more efficient, we can be more focused, present, and creative. And it helps in so many aspects of our lives if we have the tools to work through our grief and loss. And which is why it's really important to have that awareness and to have the tools to work through what comes up. In addition, the numbers speak for themselves. Now, these are all pre-COVID numbers. So imagine that these numbers are probably much higher right now. But the Grief Recovery Institute did a phenomenal study called the Grief Index, where they were able to quantify grief incidents in the workplace. And they found that between 75 to $100 billion annually were lost due to grief incidents. And that's death, divorce, financial issues. And the death includes even deaths of acquaintances, colleagues, pets. And so they were able to see how much is lost. In addition, the Council on Alcohol found that $276 billion is lost annually due to alcohol abuse. What that number doesn't include is how a lot of times alcohol relapses can be due to death or divorce or other grief incidents. So that 75 to $100 billion number actually is much higher. In addition, the Center for Workplace Mental Health found that $210.5 billion annually is lost due to depression. And again, that number doesn't account for grief, because grief and depression can look very similar. And so these are just two examples of some of the factors that also cover grief that may not be included. So we really wanted to illustrate and paint the picture just how big of, just how big of an impact grief can have in the workplace. And when we think of the bottom line and we think of people, they really do go hand in hand.
And, we want to share and illustrate just the many layers of grief that we are experiencing now, given the coronavirus. So, sometimes we just think of the loss that's occurring just in our own life on the individual level, but really the other layers that branch out from that, regionally, state, country, world, also impact us. They're also part of our consciousness. And so on the world level, we've seen rates of transmission vary from one country to another, and been watching to see, okay, how are people going back to school and work now in other countries? How can we do that here? And within our country, we've seen racism come up in new ways. We've seen impacts to voting, or just questions of how are we going to vote this fall? And throughout different regions, we've seen hotspots pop up, and different responses from one region to another, depending on resources or the administrations there. And within communities, we're seeing businesses close. We're seeing the impacts of layoffs and closed playgrounds, access to outdoor spaces. In our households, we're balancing working from home, maybe teaching our children and supporting them in distance learning or through their own grief during this time. And on the individual level, we're worrying about others that we can't see. We're missing those people. We're wondering, are we essential or are we expendable? And, we could even be feeling guilt for comparing our losses to someone else who we feel might have it worse in this situation. And so, as you can see, there's just many, many layers of grief that are going on that we're all experiencing.
And in addition to that, there are many, many different types of grief that we're experiencing. And if you look towards the right side of this chart, there's a lot of grief and loss that we're experiencing due to COVID. A loss of safety, a loss of control. We have a change in our routine, so there's that loss of familiar. We have sheltering in place, so there's kind of a loss of freedom, and businesses are closing down or having to restructure how they process and how they're going to function and thrive. There's that loss of connection and loss of touch, where we can't spend time with community, can't celebrate holidays together. And then the death and grief landscape has completely changed, because people can't say goodbye to loved ones, and we're unable to have funerals and memorials, wakes and shivas. So it's really changing how we grieve and can't grieve in community. In addition, there's lots and lots of cancellations, weddings, religious ceremonies, travel plans, childcare, baby showers. And then with all the school closing, no graduations, no proms, no being able to, spend the final days with your friends. And that's also hard on teachers as well. And so there's a lot of different layers that we're experiencing due to COVID. And on top of that, all of our past losses are magnified. So past deaths, past health concerns or traumas, or past any natural disasters or pandemics, that's all still there and still added to what we're feeling and going through. So now that we've shared some of the levels and some of the types of grief, I want to define grief. And this is a great definition that we use from the Grief Recovery Handbook. And grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind. Grief is normal and natural. Grief is also the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Again, it's the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And grief can also be that feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there, and now they're no longer there. And that's both emotionally and physically. So you can think back to the many different types of grief and start to look at it through this context. Grief is also cumulative and cumulatively negative. And so when we talk about how all the past loss are magnified, you can start to understand that all of our loss, grief doesn't just go away. Grief piles up unless it's worked through and resolved. So that could be why, a lot of people are experiencing grief around past losses. So really want to encourage you to think about this definition, and I believe Kim put it in the chat so that you can see it as well. And it's important to note that everybody's grief journey is unique. There are no comparisons whatsoever in grief. As Kim mentioned earlier, a lot of people are, feeling guilty and comparing grief. And the fact is that every emotionally painful event is experienced at 100%. So your grief does not take away from somebody else's grief, just as somebody else's grief does not take away from your grief. Your grief is valid. Every relationship is unique, and there are no stages or timelines. We all go through grief and experience grief in our own way. So again, there are no comparisons in grief. Whatever you're feeling is valid and normal, and it's okay. And we're not in the same boat. All of our situations are so different, but we can do our part to support each other. We really can.
And we want to show how grief can manifest. What can it look like? And just as Ilana was sharing about how each person's grief is unique, how it shows up in one person may look different from how it shows up in another. And this is important to remember as you're just interacting with other grievers in your life. If you respond one way, your partner, your coworker, your employee may respond differently. So there can be a lack of energy, that's pretty common, and then decreased productivity because you have reduced energy, and also frequently people have trouble focusing or remembering things. It's harder to stay productive. Some people may have to take time off or not be really present when they are at work. And they can have changes in personality because of anxiety, depression, irritability, overreacting to things, or having some type of low-grade anger. Some people may also isolate themselves and just seem very different from how they were before their loss. And again, we're all experiencing some base layer of grief in general, but especially now with the pandemic. So these things may be heightened. You may be seeing more of this now. And as you're navigating this, if you're seeing this in the workplace, we encourage you to approach it with compassion and curiosity, and really reach out and say, I've noticed that you've been late. Say you're approaching a colleague or someone, ask questions about it. as we can see here in that second bullet, of just don't necessarily jump to disciplinary actions, or even trying to fix, judge, criticize what someone's bringing up. It's difficult because we're so used to that type of conversation, but when someone's sharing a difficult experience, it's so freeing to just be able to share openly without worrying about what someone's going to say and whether or not their feelings will be too big for them, or if the subject will get changed because someone is too uncomfortable to sit with what's coming up. Some phrases to avoid saying are things like, I know how you feel. I know for some that can seem as if that would be a reassuring thing to say, but sometimes people can get upset by that because really everyone's unique again. So one person's experience, even with the same type of loss, may be different from someone else. Phrases that start with at least tend to be very minimizing or invalidating. And same are things that have the same effect of saying don't feel bad, like don't feel bad he's suffering now, or don't feel bad you're still young, you can have other children, or everything happens for a reason. Those things aren't as encouraging and can really shut someone down, feeling that they're not in a safe place to share. So some helpful phrases, again, is assuming people are doing their best. People do well when they can do well. And so asking meaningful questions to help them, and using accurate phrasing such as, I can't imagine how you feel. You can also add to that, if you feel comfortable, given the circumstances, that, I can't imagine how you feel. I know when I had my loss, I felt like this. And that just helps open the door so that they know that you're okay going there. And just asking what happens can be really helpful in allowing the griever to talk, and have that time to share some of what's coming up for them. And we have a note here that it's also important to just keep in mind your spiritual beliefs, and what helps you in your grief may not be as supportive for someone else. Someone else may have different beliefs. And so just don't assume that yours will be as comforting to them. So putting these things together leads us to our first tool of, finding or being a compassionate listener. So, thinking about those phrases that are less helpful and the things that you can do that are more helpful will help you establish yourself as a safe person and a safe space for someone to share, where they can go without judgment and comparing criticism, and also know that you can honor their confidentiality so that they know anything that's personal that's shared there will stay there. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks. In addition, building awareness and acceptance are very, very powerful. So by being here, you can start to really take inventory of what you yourself are experiencing and what people around you are experiencing. And you can name the loss. You can name that feeling and be witnessed naming that feeling. And so to just really start to build that awareness muscle of what you're going through. Again, this is not judgment, this is awareness. And it's important to not resort to, I'm fine. It's very easy when someone asks how you're doing to say, I'm fine. But if you're not fine, you can say, I'm not doing great. Thanks for asking. So you can start speaking your emotional truth. And also now's a good time to really take stock of what tools that you have. What works? What doesn't work? What needs to be replaced? And to really, again, this is without judgment or criticism, but to build up that awareness and build up that acceptance piece. The airlines always say it, and it's honestly the best advice, is to put on your own oxygen mask first. That is the best way to help your team, your family, and everyone around you. If you work through your own grief and your own emotions and have those tools, there is a ripple effect to everyone around you. And the converse is true as well. You know, if you don't work through your emotions, that also has a ripple effect on your team and your family and your community. And a few more tools that we want to share is to model that behavior. So regardless of what your role is in your company or in your family, it really can start with you. So if you model that behavior, and if you are able to say when you're feeling vulnerable, and then it can make others feel safe and give others the space to be able to share what's coming up for them. And this is especially important if you're in a management role and have teams, or as a parent. It's actually very powerful to model that behavior. To implement some sort of a buddy check system where you can check in on each other, it can be very, very powerful to know there's someone looking out for you. Walking breaks are just, I cannot stress how powerful that is to get the body moving a little bit, especially outside when you can. If you're in a position where you can help offload work of someone who's really, really struggling, that can be really very powerful for the person. And I really encourage you to be extra patient with yourself and be extra patient with others. And remember, everybody grieves in their own way. And I know we went through these kind of fast, but there was a lot of things we wanted to tell you and not a lot of time today.
So all of these tools are ways that you can support yourself and others around you. And it's wonderful to have those to help you navigate, but sometimes you need outside support as well. So we've listed here, you know, just there are many options, and we wanted you to know that you can find something that works for you, because different people resonate with different types of support. And we won't go into each one, but there's bereavement counseling to traditional therapy, drop-in groups, and then there's also the evidence-based, action-based grief recovery method type programs, which Ilana and I both offer. And those are, you know, more structured programs, so different format. And in addition, it can be so valuable to have a corporate grief support program where you can really assess your current system and your policies to make sure your approach to grief and loss in the workplace is standardized and robust. Ilana and I are really passionate about the programs we've been developing to offer this and to help companies to evaluate their needs and to learn more about grief and how it shows up in the workplace, so that really they can practice these tools and have a stronger team and a stronger company culture as well.
To summarize what we went through today, grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind. And it's also the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or a change in a pattern of behavior. And grief is cumulative and cumulatively negative. Everybody grieves differently, and there are many different types of grief and layers that we're all experiencing as an individual, as a society, as a world. And again, there are a lot of different types of support out there. We want you to know that you don't ever have to grieve by yourself. And some really powerful tools is to be a compassionate listener and create a safe space, to build that awareness and acceptance, and to be able to name those emotions, and to be gentle with yourself and with others. And we want to just leave a few minutes for Q&A. We see there's a few questions coming in here. Let's see, the first one, can grief at a micro level spill out and start to affect things at a more macro level? Great 100%. Question.
Definitely. Yeah. Do you mind if I speak to that?
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask you if you wanted to. I'm going to pull up your slide too.
Yeah. So definitely, there are ripple effects on every level, because like Ilana was sharing, if you have grief, it's going to show up in how you interact with other people. And it puts a filter on how you view the world as well. So especially imagining people who are in positions of power, positions of leadership, it's going to affect the decisions they make, which affect everyone underneath them or around them. So definitely the grief that we carry affects so many different levels.
And there are actually some numbers in that grief index that we referenced earlier that showed that decision makers actually made decisions that they were really unhappy with, and that had a negative effect on the company that they made while they're grieving and while they had something going on. Because we're all human, you know. It's impossible to not have that show up. It's a great question. And what we have another question here too is starting a conversation with another by noting that you've noticed a certain behavior too much like blaming. What are some good openers? That's a great question. And yes, do you mind if I start with this one, Kim? Yeah, okay. Yeah, again, it goes back to, you know, modeling that behavior, because you don't want to sound like blaming or attacking, and asking curious and compassionate questions. You know, you can say, hey, you know, what's been going on lately? And you can say what's been coming up for you to really, again, to model that behavior. You know, you can say something like, yeah, it's been hard for me working from home and homeschooling the kids and this and that. You know, how have things been going for you? What's been coming up for you? And asking from a place of compassion and gentleness, and not of attacking or judging.
Yeah, and you know, I agree that tone and modeling can go so far and really shift how a conversation is received. And to add to that too, you know, you can have an opener such as, you know, I've noticed you're not quite yourself these days. And I'm just wondering if everything is okay. I'm here for you. And just leaving it at that can help somebody know that you can be someone they can confide in. I hope that helps.
And a really good word, like rule of thumb, is you see the graphic we have up there, a heart with ears. It's a little touchy-feely, but if you ever feel like you don't know what to say, and you can just picture this image in your head, you know, coming from a place of compassion, not a place of logic. Because remember, grief is emotional, grief is not intellectual. And so to be coming from a place of your heart and ask questions from an emotion stance, not from an intellectual stance. If there's something you want to know because you're curious, not a good thing to ask. But if it's something you want to know because it's compassionate or helping the other person get their story out, then that's another issue altogether. So our email address is up here. Thank you so much for being with us here on this very foggy Wednesday morning in San Mateo. And we hope this was helpful for you. This is a topic we love to talk about a lot, so please feel free to, you know, to reach out with questions or anything else.
And I've put our email in the chat if that's more helpful for you to copy and paste from there if you would like to contact us. But thank you so much for being with us. It was really wonderful.
Thank you. And we really, really value your feedback. So we do have a post survey that we'd be really appreciative if you could fill out, so that we can understand what, you know, what was helpful for you and what, you know, takeaways that you had. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ilana and Kim. Cheryl, did you have anything to add? I know you're traveling. But we have another session of Business Essentials popping up tomorrow. And the topic for tomorrow is now what? What to do after receiving a PPP loan. And then we have a big town hall meeting tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. how to track PPP expenses and minimize loan forgiveness. So I hope you can join in on those. And we have a town hall meeting scheduled next week with Rakuten Ready. It's for both restaurants and consumers, how they can save 20% cash back by ordering takeout. And we have a Business Essentials from Shivani Sataria on the ABCs of AB5, which is the California's new independent contractor law. So if we have no more questions, I'm going to wrap it up for today. Great, thank you. The link is out there and the email, and I will send a follow-up email. So if you ladies have anything for me to send out, I will send it out to this audience. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Great,
Thank you,
you.
Pauline. Thank you, San Mateo Chamber.